Hello, I'm Leslie Bergstrom, Superintendent of the Oregon School District, and I wanted to give you an update on some important work we have been engaging in with our community related to school funding. Our school board has had 5 different focus groups over the course of the summer in order to be able to describe the challenges we're experiencing and collect input related to what people value about their students' school experience and also what they believe to be most important as we create a pathway forward. However, we know that all of you have very busy schedules, and it's difficult to get to focus groups that are held at random times. So we wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to hear all of the same information that we shared with our focus group participants and to offer your own feedback. At the end of this presentation, we will have an email address where you can send any questions you may have. So we're going to start with what our shared goal is. I believe that everybody in our community believes that we need to have the best educator in every classroom. The teacher in the classroom has the greatest impact on student success, and we know that. Research has told us that time and time again. Throughout the course of the presentation, when I'm talking about our educators, I want to make sure you know I'm talking about an educator in the broadest term. The teacher in the classroom, the school counselor, the school psychologist, our paraprofessionals, the people who are in the main offices greeting our students every day. So, as we're going through the presentation, we're going to focus on 2 main challenges. The first is lack of state funding, and the second is how that lack of state funding has contributed to a potential challenge in retaining and attracting the talented people that we have and that we will need in the future. So there is a little bit of information that helps to tell a story. And the first is our national ranking related to school funding per student, state funding per student. So in 2002, we ranked number 11 out of the 50 states, and we were actually 11% above the national average in state spending per pupil on education. Well, by the year 2020, we had fallen to 25th in the nation related to state spending on per student. We're actually 6% below the national average right now. Well, that's the largest drop in national ranking of any state during this time period. And the drop from 11 to 25 doesn't even include the last 2 years of our budget, where in 21-22 and 22-23, we are receiving a 0% increase from the state. Consequently, we expect our ranking to fall even further in the future. Now, how does this impact our system? How does it impact our operational budget? Well, the first thing to know is that our operational budget, about 90% of that is determined by the state, either determined through revenue limit setting or through the amount of funding the state gives school districts per pupil. So 90% of our budget is about $55 million. Actually, the other 10% of our budget, we don't have much control over either. A lot of that is connected to federal grants. So of our whole operating budget, 80% of it, or about $49 million, is spent on staffing and benefits, which makes perfect sense because that's what we know makes the biggest difference. It's the adults in the building and how they interact with our students and the learning experiences that they create. That's what makes the difference. So for the last 2 years, we've received a 0% increase per student from the state. Now, that definitely has had an impact on our budget. So I am going to explain this through a graph. So you see the blue line on the graph in front of you indicates the change in the consumer price index from the previous year. The orange line shows us the change in per student funding from the state. So if you look at the blue line and the orange line, you see that they're very closely tied from 2014 all the way up until when you see a very drastic difference, and that's starting the 21-22 school year. You see state funding, the change in state funding per pupil going down to 0 at the same time that you see inflation rising dramatically. Now, for the 21-22 school year, the difference between the orange line and the blue line is about a $2.9 million gap. Now, the blue line then separates, right? And you see the dashed lines. And that's because for 22-23, we don't know exactly what the CPI will be yet. So we know that the gap will be between 3.6 and 4.8 million. Now, what impact does that have on our educators? If we want to remain a destination district, and I'll define destination district before I go any further, and that is the idea that when people work in other places, they're very interested in jobs in Oregon. Or if they are just graduating from college, they're hoping to be able to get an interview with Oregon. Or it's families who move to the area specifically for the schools. We are currently a destination district, and we want to remain that way. We also want to maintain the high staff retention rates that we have. When our staff come here and they get a job here, they stay here. We have very high staff retention rates, and once again, we want to keep that. But in order to do that, we have to offer compensation that keeps up with inflation and is competitive. So what you'll notice is that for the 21-22 school year, CPI or CPIU, the statistic determined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to be used in bargaining, the CPI was actually at 1.23. The base pay increase, because we've received no additional money from the state and all of the prices for everything related to funding continue to go up. Because of that, we weren't able to offer any increase in base pay for our staff members. Now in 22-23, the CPI or CPIU is set at 4.7. With our current financial situation, once again, we will be able to offer a $0 increase to base pay. So we feel like we're 5.93% behind in what we're able to offer our staff. And of course, we have absolutely no idea what's in front of us for 23-24, particularly when the inflation rates are what they are. So what exactly is the bottom line on this? If we want to continue to offer the highest quality education and services to our students, we must keep and attract the excellent educators that we have in an increasingly competitive market. Because as many of you are aware, there are fewer people entering the field of education. So things are becoming quite competitive. So in order to keep and attract excellent educators, we have to offer a competitive salary that allows our educators to continue serving in the OSD. We want them here. They're great. So what have we been doing about this so far? Well, so far, we have continued to review our budget and analyze for places of savings. We have had to make some challenging decisions, such as the change of health insurance. That was not a popular decision. People didn't want to change health insurance, but it was necessary in order to lower costs and lock in rates. And over the course of 3 years, it saved $600,000. We've also been using our one-time ESSER funds. Those are federal funds that were meant for COVID-related expenses. We have been using those funds for COVID-related expenses, for things like technology, as an example, and also for short-term positions that are meant to support our students in connection to coming back to school after the pandemic. So we've added student mental health supports and academic supports. We've also done some debt restructuring. Consequently, we've been able to reduce expenses by about $2 million. So then, what have other districts been able to do? Well, other districts have been using one-time funds for operations. And that's challenging because you're taking funds such as ESSER funds and you're using it for operational expenses, which means you can pay the bill this year, but you don't have money to pay the bill next year. Other school districts have been reducing services and staff, which of course leads to increasing class sizes. Some went to operational referendum last April, and some are seeking funds through an operational referendum this November. Some of our neighboring districts have already made the decision or are discussing whether or not they're going to a referendum in November. So the districts that you see on the screen, all but one, and you can see that indicated, have made the decision to go. So, as the board is considering an operational referendum, what do they believe to be the priorities? And these are the priorities that we've been sharing with focus groups and collecting input on. And the first important thing is keeping our class sizes similar to what they are today. We also want to be able to offer teachers salaries and benefits that keep up with inflation and are competitive. We want to be able to continue to provide those mental health service supports and the academic supports that we paid for with one-time money. We'd like to be able to make those permanent positions. We also want to be able to have the necessary operating funds to meet the needs of our students and their families. So, what will happen next? Well, the school board will take action on this topic on Monday, and they will be making a decision about going to a referendum in November. We will also have continued community engagement, and we encourage you to send questions and comments to questions@oregonsd.org. Also, we want to give you an opportunity to get even more information by going to oregonsd.org/school funding, where we will be continuing to update school funding information as we receive it. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope we have helped you gain a broader understanding of the challenges we're facing.